Hi, I want to make a video on what matters in the universe and how you don't need a witness to have something like a sentient being feel and it mean something. The only witness you need for something to matter is the witness of the person making the experience. And the only reason another person would be relevant is if that other person was suffering as well. So if a person's by themselves in a room, sort of like the tree falling in the forest, and it doesn't. In asking the question, did the tree still make a noise? Did the tree still fall? Did it still happen? Well, the tree still fell, and the tree still made a noise. It's all something. It's all independent of itself. Everything. It doesn't need you to be there for you to perceive it. Yes, from your point of view, you need to be there to hear it and to see it or hear it or whatever you need to do to conclude that it fell or that it made a noise when it fell. But the fact that it fell, sort of like when a person dies, even though they're dead and they're not experiencing anymore, the suffering still matters just as much now as a person as when they're experiencing the suffering and when they're alive. Even if it's you're experiencing some pain and you no longer have the pain and you're still alive, it still matters just as much then as it does now. And that goes back to the idea that it led you to where you are now, and the pain obviously had an effect, and everything that has an effect and cause and effect leading to something new has an significance. It means something that leads to other things feeling, and it has an effect. Even if there's nothing feeling, it does have an effect, and it still does something, and not on the pain, but on these cause and effects. The cause and effect, one thing leading into another, and it all matters. How it ends. It all matters, and the concept from cause and effect. It's relevant to the concept of cause and effect, and all has an effect on something. And back to the idea that the only time it's relevant. Say there's no one. Say you have a person suffering by themselves, and they lived and they died. And they lived and they died, and they suffered horribly. They right when they came to existence, they just popped out of nowhere. Just using as an example, they popped out of nowhere, and they tripped and fell, and they broke their leg, and then they broke their leg, and they bled out to death, and they died, and they repeated it 20 times, and no one else was there except them, and they were there for 5 minutes suffering out and bleeding out and crying, and they're miserable. That doesn't mean you need someone else there to confirm that what's happening there with a person suffering, that means something. It doesn't need any other outside source. The only source, it doesn't need a second person. It doesn't need a second viewer. It doesn't need an outside witness. The witness that you need, the only witness that you need is a sentient being, the person themselves suffering from the experience themselves. The person suffering that has a broken leg, that's experiencing it, it matters to them. And just because there's no one else there to perceive it, doesn't mean that the person experiencing the pain isn't feeling some sort of pain. And the only time it would be relevant bringing another person in is if that other person was experiencing pain. And the more people you have, the more likely you're going to have more pain. Because you're having more than one person experience that pain, more than one sentient being experience that pain. And I would think that this has a lot to do with this whole disregarding of... I think a lot of people use this kind of thinking when they want to disregard certain things, or they're trying to hide skeletons in their closet. They don't want to accept what they did was wrong, or they don't want to take responsibility for someone else's misgivings or misdoing or someone else's suffering. And I think this is an argument a lot of people use, is they say it doesn't matter. Well, if I just walk out, I just ignore it. I just la 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 with my fingers in my ears. It didn't happen then, right? No, it still happened, and it still means something, even if the person that you harmed or caused a harm or walked away from harm ended up dying. And it still matters because the suffering they had, even though they're no longer there to have any concept of the suffering because they're dead. And the same thing, it even matters just as much the same if the person is still alive and they got it bandaged up and they're fine now, they're no longer in pain. It still matters all the same. And the matter in the universe is only that the person experiencing something is in pain or has a sensation, and it matters no matter who else is there. And it doesn't matter all of a sudden just because someone else is there on the 21st time that you've woken up and broken your leg. It doesn't matter that they're there, other than that now they may be at risk of doing the same thing or being in pain as well. And the more people you have, the more likely you're going to have these problems, the more likely you're going to be doing something. You're going to have an effect on something. Even just tying your shoe, waiting too long to go somewhere. That can have a negative effect on someone else, and that's the thing. The more people you have, the more strings are tied in knots. The more knots you're going to have in this big spider web of strings that you're going to have to deal with. You're going to have to untie the knots. The more knots you have, the bigger the knots. They might get tangled up, plenty of knots in one, making one big knot. It's all having effect. The more people you have, in a way, the more likely you're setting yourself up for risk for more suffering and more pain. And that's why it's the only matter in the universe, is that the only thing that matters is that you're feeling something, and that you're either feeling good or you're not feeling good at all, or you're feeling bad or you're not feeling bad is the better way of putting it, the more precise way of putting it, and you don't need anyone else there. The very fact that you preface that with needing someone else there almost in a way bypasses or passes the idea that the person experiencing doesn't matter, because they're the one personally experiencing the pain. And if the person that exists cares about the person in pain, so you're subjecting the person that cares about the person into pain, and they're going to care now, and they're going to be in pain watching this person in pain, and you're subjecting more people into pain. So bringing another person in wouldn't be doing anything unless the person experiencing something, almost in a way, has a voyeuristic desire and feels like they need to fill a gap in their soul by having someone watch them and acknowledge their suffering. But that's not the point. The point is that the person is experiencing something, and it matters no matter what. It matters if there's someone else there. It matters if there's no one's there. It matters no matter what. The only thing you need is the person experiencing the pain to experience it, and that's all that matters in the universe, I guess. Bye.